Hi, I'm Rework and I've been working on my Steam game Better Up for the past 6 months now. So far we've covered a lot of ground, going from a super simple prototype to a more polished alpha which I released onto itch. 2 months after that, I started preparing the game's demo to be released onto Steam for the Next Fest event. As far as content goes, the demo was basically already done. I had planned 25 items, 3 enemies and 1 boss for this demo. And if you follow along with the last devlog, you'll know I managed to crack out all of that. The problem was that while I was playtesting the game and getting it ready for release, I realized a pretty crucial fact about it. It wasn't really all that fun. And to be honest, it wasn't a super shocking discovery for me. In the process of adding all the content that I planned for the demo, I didn't really stop to consider if every addition was actually going to make the game more fun. Imagine if you were trying to put on more mass onto your body. Obviously, you'd have to eat a lot of food to add that mass in the first place. But if you don't work out, you're not gonna get more muscular, you're just gonna get fat. That's essentially what was happening with my game. Sure, it had a lot of mass, but in all the wrong places and just not very good looking. To solve this problem, I needed to dig deep and find out what the problem actually was. And the only way to do that is really to just play the game or watch other people play your game. So I started doing both. I enlisted some friends to help me playtest the game while I myself either watched them play the game or played alongside them. Through these repeated playtests, I started to notice a pattern. But for you to understand what I mean, you need to know what my game is about first. Better Up is a twin-stick arena shooter where you don't actually have a gun. Instead, you bounce a baseball around the arena to kill enemies, and in between rounds you buy upgrades to make killing enemies even easier. Now, what I noticed in these playtests was that more often than not, the items you got from the shop almost entirely determined how well you do in each run. If you were unlucky enough to not get any good items early on, the run was essentially impossible. On the other hand, if you managed to get just 1 or 2 powerful items, the game would get so easy there would barely be any point in paying attention to the game anymore. In roguelike games, there needs to be a certain balance between skill and luck, so that when you try out all your runs, it should look like this bell curve, where a small minority of runs are so unbelievably lucky, you'd be stupid not to win. And on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes runs might be so unlucky it could seem impossible to win. But overwhelmingly, the vast majority of runs should show a balance between luck and skill. If your game leans too much to the side of demanding only skill from the player, the game can get kind of stale and maybe become even predictable. But in my case, the problem was the exact opposite. Instead of demanding only skill from the player, the game was almost entirely reliant on luck. Since runs get decided entirely by the quality of upgrades you get, most players end up feeling powerless when it comes to influencing the outcome of the game. They essentially just feel like a bystander rather than an active participant. To remedy this, I needed to shift the balance of the game away from luck and more onto skill. So my first attempt included adding a rarity system to the game. I started assigning every item into one of 4 categories. White items, which are the most common and typically pretty cheap. Green items, which are slightly more expensive and a little rarer. These provide interesting effects that are weak on their own, but can combo together to become strong. Purple items appear almost just as often as green items, but come at much steeper prices, and in return offer much stronger effects. And finally, red items, which are the rarest, with only a 15% chance of appearing in the shop. These are typically very expensive and very powerful items that can instantly boost your chances of winning. With this new system implemented, I started playtesting the game again, and found that the game was much more consistent now. It no longer felt like a crazy 50-50 swing between being impossible to play and being way too easy. But if you thought that was the end of it, then you'd be sorely mistaken, because this is where the real trouble really starts. But Rework, didn't you just say the game's more consistent now? Well, yes, but not exactly in a good way. Prior to the Rarity System being introduced, it was basically a coin toss as to whether or not you were going to get a good run. But after adding the new system, it seemed like 9 out of every 10 runs were borderline impossible to win. In a way, yes, the runs became more consistent in terms of quality, but the quality had also drastically lowered. The change had actively made the game worse and less fun. I knew definitively now that the problem wasn't just about the luck of getting good or bad items. The items themselves were also a huge problem. But knowing that there's a problem is different from knowing what it is or how to fix it. So I needed to find out what was going wrong first. I started by listing out all the items in their 4 categories, as well as tagging what each item contributed to the player. I noticed that across the categories, all the major damage items were basically concentrated in the red level, with little to no other alternatives for damage in the other 3 levels. The reason for this was that I had assumed all the good and powerful items should be rare, while all the weak items should be more common. Makes sense, right? But in actuality, the common white items are going to be the most accessible power-ups for the player to get, and so they need to be good. Not terribly good or anything, but good enough that stacking them makes a big difference. And you can see this exact thing in games like Risk of Rain 2. The white items in Risk of Rain 2 obviously can't compare to a single legendary red item, but on their own they still contribute greatly to the player's kit and give them the foundational abilities to survive until they can get even better upgrades. Simply put, my items at the top were way too powerful, while my guys at the bottom were way too weak. I had unintentionally introduced the worst problem of all time into my game: capitalism. To fix this, I had to shift more of the power back down to the lower level items. That meant removing the worst of the white items and replacing them with items that add more damage to the game, and also buffing existing white items while slightly nerfing red items. Of course, I didn't forget to distribute some damage items into the green and purple categories as well. Once all these changes were implemented, the game felt miles better. White and green items no longer felt so useless and depressing to find in a shop, and red items didn't just instantly guarantee wins anymore. Of course, perfect endings only happen in fairy tales, and I'd love to tell you that just doing these things transformed the game into some kind of masterpiece, but that's just not the case. Right now, the game still is leaning a little more on the side of too easy, and it still sometimes feels like getting certain good items trivializes the game. Now, don't get me wrong, the game's much better off now than where it was before, and it is still a relatively fun game. It just feels like there's a lot of untapped potential left and the game could still be improved. Either way, I didn't have the luxury to dwell on things, as there wasn't much time left till the next fest, and there was still one more thing about the game's design that was really bothering me. This guy. If you didn't watch my previous devlogs, here's a recap. This enemy is one of the new additions to the game that I did in my second devlog. Initially, it was supposed to be a simple variant of the normal zombie enemy that moves slightly faster, but I wasn't super happy about the role it played in the game, and reworked it to instead spawn pools that slow you down when they die. I said in my last video that this ended up working pretty good, but after doing all that playtesting with the reworked items, I realized this enemy wasn't really doing what I wanted it to do. The idea was to create a very dangerous enemy that spawns occasionally, but when they do spawn, they should present enough of a threat that players instantly target them before they can do any crazy damage. But I realized while playtesting that there functionally wasn't much of a difference in killing these guys here or here. If all it does is spawn a slowing area of effect upon death, it doesn't really make a huge difference if the area of effect spawns near you or far away from you. And that really comes down to the fact that you can and probably will run from one to the other in a matter of seconds while trying to chase the ball down. So when these guys do spawn, they don't really strike fear into the hearts of players. It's more like a wisp of annoyance instead, because prioritizing killing them doesn't really make much of a difference. Killing it now versus later is still going to spawn that area of effect. To remedy this, I did another rework. I completely changed its behavior so that instead of chasing the player, it simply waltzes off slowly to a random position on the map. When they get there, a 5-second timer starts and they begin to summon 5 additional ranged enemies. If you let it be, these spiders will actually eventually erupt into the map and add a ton of chaos to the board, which makes killing the origin of this chaos a much higher priority. After making this change, I let my friends play the game again, and while watching them, I noticed that there finally was real panic and fear whenever one of these reworked enemies spawned.
It's not funny, I'm not funny. And I got the thing as well. Why?
And that meant it was working exactly as intended. By this point, there were only 20 days left before the next fest, and I still had barely done any real playtesting or even finished core features like the main menu, settings, and controller support. So I spent some time banging out all of that. For one, I actually made a proper menu this time with the help of my artist Gummy, and also added a settings menu, a credit screen, and a tutorial. Plus, I redid the shop to make it look a bit nicer, and did the same for the game over screen. Only then did I start playtesting with people in my Discord server. During these playtests, I received a ton of feedback from the playtesters, and I mean a metric ton. If you're one of the playtesters who helped out, I can't thank you enough for helping me root out all the weird bugs and giving your honest critique on the game. After all of that was done, I finally clicked the release button on the demo and let it loose. Since I haven't really been marketing the Steam page much, the game only has 30 wishlists so far, and I'm really hoping that this Snacks Fest boosts it up to at least 8,000 before the next video. If you want to support me, please consider wishlisting the game on Steam or even playing the demo. Alternatively, feel free to subscribe and drop a comment as well. That's all for today, thanks for watching.